Thank you, Tadeusz. Good evening, everyone. Shalom, Erev Tov. Before I start my slideshow, let me thank you all for joining this lecture. I'm pleased and honored to have the opportunity to address such a distinguished audience, and I'd like to extend my special thanks to the National Library of Israel for this series, and thank you, Tadeusz, for your kind assistance in making this event possible. And you know, last month I had to be as a visiting researcher in Jerusalem, but I regrettably didn't manage to come because of some personal issues. So for me, it's a sort of virtual visit to Israel today. And also, I'd like to thank Ms. Nadia Ufimtseva, Program Director of the Ukrainian Association for Jewish Studies, for her idea and invitation for me to give this talk. It's a pleasure, and I appreciate it. And finally, I want to express my gratitude to everyone in Israel and everywhere in the world who supports Ukraine during the violent, bloody Russian war. And I'm grateful to the Ukraine's armed forces, over whom I'm alive and have a chance to proceed with my research and writing and deliver this lecture. And now I have to switch on my presentation. So what I want to talk about today is the Ukrainian literary imagery of the Jewish world in the short fiction, which initially refers to over 100 literary pieces written in a span with from the late 19th century through the first third of the 20th century. And we'll consider far less quantity of the text, but what we have to keep in mind is that it's still about an extensive period in the Ukrainian literary and social history. What's remarkable. And when the borders moved constantly, Ukrainian lands were part of different empires, and a large number of historical events occurred. And you can see on the screen, you can see on the screen two maps of Ukrainian lands in various periods. This one is dated 1914, and Ukraine's present borders are highlighted in white, and we just see how it all changes, because as we can see here, the vast majority of Ukrainian lands are included to the Russian Empire. And this green, various shades of green, it's also today's, it's also Ukrainian lands. It's part of Galicia, Bukovina, and Transcarpathia, which was parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then, just in a decade, it's the second map is it's a map of the Ukrainian lands on the eve of the Second World War, and we see that a big part of Ukraine is included, is under the Soviet regime already. And this blue part is Volyn and Galicia, which were included to Poland. Transcarpathia, which is orange, is a part of Hungary, and part of Odessa Oblast, present Odessa Oblast, is included to Romania, this green on the map. And these two maps don't reflect the fact that in some years, Ukrainian lands also were part of Czechoslovakia. So it was like a range of constant changes, and this all is reflected in Ukrainian short fiction. And definitely this time frame involves plenty of pivotal historical moment I'd like to address. I'd like just to list. So as you know, they are pivotal is not only in the Ukrainian local history, but also in European history, like the existence and collapse of the several empires, the revolution of 1905, the Jewish pogroms, First World War, the revolution, October Revolution, and the establishment of Ukrainian independent state, the riots and revolutions of this period of 1917-1921, and then Soviet occupation of Ukrainian lands, the Great Terror, and crackdown, and many others reflected in a plethora of short fiction pieces, which represent this different and oftentimes contradictory political stances, cultural orientations, social views. Also, this period, I'd like to mention that this period is believed to be highly intensive and transitional in terms of Ukrainian literary history. I mean, first of all, the paradigm shift, which happened as the shift from the realistic literary paradigm of the 19th century Ukrainian literature, to the modernist and avant-gardist ones. Also, we had a spike in interest to the short fiction genres in European literature in general, and Ukrainian literature in particular. And we have the development of these short fiction genres, like the appearance of the variety of short fiction stories. And also in this period, we had improvement of the representation of the Jewish culture in Ukrainian literature. And at the same time, like maturation and differentiation of the Ukrainian literature itself. And the final thing I'd like to mention is the executed renaissance of the 1920s and 30s, which, as you may probably know, is a term coined for description of the hundreds of extremely gifted Ukrainian writers, artists, intellectuals, who were like arrested and executed during the Stalin's Great Terror simply because of Ukrainian language, Ukrainian identity. And a vast majority of authors I considered within this theme were martyred by Soviets. So I think it like provides a kind of background, a kind of introduction. So let me start. Just a second. Let me start from I hope you see it.
Yes, we do see it.
You see my presentation, yeah?
Yes.
Some technical issues. So let me start from saying a few words about how the Jewish body is represented in Ukrainian short fiction. I'm assuming that the literary representation of the others, like the other cultures, other communities, is associated with the body. And in terms of contemporary cultural studies, the body is simultaneously real and imagined object inscribed in culture. And in this regard, the bodies of the others are different from the self, like their own body, and they remind to be a territory bizarre, ridiculous, and abnormal. And definitely social meanings of the body depend entirely on the dominant discourses in which they are placed. And while the idea isn't the new one, it's still productive for the research of the Jewish imagery in Ukrainian literature, because beginning with folklore, the anthropology of Jewish images is manifested through somatic markers and body rituals of otherness, like the hair color or side locks and the like. And on the first place, because this introduction about the body will be like a more theoretical one, in the first place, I'd like to address the ambiguous dichotomy of the Jewish strengths and weakness. Unlike many European cultures and literatures where being a Jew was frequently associated with physical disabilities and morbidity, there is no integrated discourse of this kind in Ukrainian short fiction. But yes, sometimes writers use the diminutive language, the diminutive style, to emphasize physical fragility, fear, and misery of the Jewish characters. And here is a kind of difference between the 19th century short fiction representation of the Jew and Jews and the 20th century representation, new patterns of the 20th century, because in the 19th century short fiction, we have the poor Jew, like poor sickly Jew, and he deserves sympathy because of his misery. But in the 20th century, in this new wave of short fiction, the Jew are regarded as human. So there is no such emphasis on like nationality or other identities, but sympathy and interest to the human suffering, to human pain, to human happiness, and so on. Of course, later, so in the 20th century short fiction, this literary, I call it device, this diminutive style of description, oftentimes reflects psychological condition of people, and particularly it is so when it comes to the pogroms, or in order to show the inner transformation of the Jewish character in hardships. And of course, on the other hand, there are a number of literary examples of physical strength and tenacity of the Jews. So this is like ambiguous, let's call it discourse or something like that. And my second point here is the stereotypical Jewish appearance and vestimentary code. And there are two sets of the recurrent tools for description of the Jews. The Jewish appearance. The bodily set, let's call it the bodily set, consists of side locks, red hair, a red beard, black hats, the specific form of the nose, but rarely, and so on. And the vestimentary set, this description relating to garments, and consists of the signs of yarmulka, black hats, long black coats, some ritual garments, and so on. And here is the paradox that despite the clear understanding of how the stereotypical Jew is presented, like described in literature, so we have some kind of imagination how she or he looks in literature. In fact, these portraits of these Jewish description, Jewish figures, in fact, widely vary. So there is no two similar images in reality. And as an illustration, as a quick illustration, let's look at the rich gallery of Jewish characters in short fiction stories of Volodymyr Leontovich. I hope you see. And I read it out.
Yes, we do see.
Okay. Okay.
Now it's good.
I don't see. Okay. So let me read out. Tall, lean, and slouching quadragenarian with a reddish, thick like felt beard, Joska Gerstein. And here is tall, clumsy, with long arms and legs, clumsy and grasping hands, a loud trumpet-like voice, David Hopkin. And another man is an old world Jew with side locks in lobster duck. It's a specific code. Dark and black-eyed Paisach Hopkovich. And the fourth is handsome with dark red hair and a beard, subtle features of a pale face, brown-eyed, and always friendly smile, Slavutinsky. So here we have four different, radically different portraits, four different men. And this portrayals, the way of portrayal is in fact varying. And my third point here is using, I just mentioned, using of corporeal metaphors and the body of a crowd metaphor, like an image which is also used quite frequently and specifically for illustration of the unity of the Jewish community, like the body of the united, the body of the Jewish people. And in addition, writers often depict the pogroms with a kind of bodily metaphors. It's rather often like bloody sunset, the bloody sunset, or the ashen face of the morning. It's like powerful image, and it's recurrent in the short fiction of Alexa Kopelenko. We will come back to him shortly. And my fourth point here in this theoretical introduction about the body is the medical discourse of the representation of the Jewish body, as some scholars discuss that medicine and literature have something in common, in particular the process of diagnosing of health and social pathologies, respectively. I'm sorry. And I find this idea quite attractive because, taking into account all the hardships or all the upheavals of the last centuries, little wonder that the Jewish pictures in Ukrainian short fiction are frequently followed by the pictures of diseases, trauma, and death. So the central image here in this series, medical series, let's call it medical series of short fiction is, of course, the Jew sufferer. And sometimes it's associated with a special Jewish disease, which today is believed to be a complex of different symptoms which have nothing to do with each other. But actually, this stereotype about the particular Jewish sickness, Jewish disease, rarely appears in Ukrainian short fiction, and I know, as far as I know, it's more noticeable in European culture in general. At large, trauma and pathology is the driver of a plot or the reference to crucial events of history. And for instance, I'd like to address. Yes, let's go ahead. In a very short story, I'd call it a sketch by Hrystyna Semeryn. Hrystyna Semeryn, it's a male pseudonym for a female writer, a friend and sister-in-law of Ukrainian renowned poetess and playwright Lesa Ukrainka, if you may probably know. In this story, which is titled Jews, we see an old blind Jew with his granddaughter, and they are coming by train to Vilnius, today Vilnius in Lithuania, to the hospital, as the granny, this elder man, has a mental illness because of the pogroms in which he survived. So it's like a picture, like a kind of sequel to the past events of pogrom. And this memory, these events, are reflected in this mental disease of the man. So, to recap quickly, I just say that the Jewish body is represented partially in a stereotyped but ambiguous manner, and the body has complicated meanings and many functions. So the body can function as the tool for empathetic description and prompting the sympathy to the Jews, or the reference to historical event and specifically to tragedies, social crisis, social life, how it is, and also it can refer to some bodily stereotypes of representation of the Jews, as I mentioned, some specific traits, specific features of the face, and so on. And also the garment plays a big part for this identification. And now let's move to the next part. I have some difficulties. My apologies. I have some difficulties with my own presentation. Okay. This next part is one of the biggest in my initial research. So I want to talk a bit about this. And let's start from the idea, that there were too few female writers writing about the Jewish women, and the way of representation of Jewish women continues to be fragmentary and quite stereotyped. And it's obvious because the strategy of portrayal of Jewish women depend on the representation of the national community overall. So while a scope of national being, of national life, is predominantly covered from the standpoint of Jewish men and through male characters mostly, the Jewish female characters are oftentimes portrayed in a biased way, and as a secondary characters, almost invisible characters in many of the text. And in addition, an objectified woman can be traditionally regarded as the sexualized other. In the lens of feminist criticism, I don't want to use this so much to use the feminist lens today, but certainly it is. So I'd like to paraphrase the words of a Polish scholar Agata Raszkiewicz about Zuzanna Gilczanka, Polish poetess and the Holocaust victim whose poetry I also research a lot. That the female Jewish characters in the literature, in the Ukrainian literature specifically, is mostly the doubly alien. It's like a classic thesis that doubly alien as a woman and as a Jew. And so it is my assumption too. And on the other hand, historical changes in the first third of the 20th century, this a large number of these events and changes and transformations, transitions, secularization, and even this socialist influence, socialist influence on the society and secularization of society, and also the development of literature, to some extent contributed and affected the appearance of more or less self-sufficient Jewish female characters, which deny traditional gender roles, stereotypes about the role of women, and which are and who are immersed in the context of professional growth and like microhistory, macrohistory, not microhistory, but macrohistory. Many of they experience many of these large historical events, like not only like pogroms, but also revolutions, Soviet crackdown, and so on. And what can I say about the diversity of Jewish female characters? The first type in my improvised classification is the family woman, of course. A mother, a wife, and a daughter, and mothers sometimes are depicted as like a tired, of course, tired and even ugly. I'm sorry for this word regarding people, and almost always a mother depicted with a bunch of little kids in their arms, with no further details about the hardships that they may be experiencing. And the image of motherhood is followed by the motif of self-sacrifice, especially when during the pogroms, like doomed to death Jewish mothers try to hide and rescue their children. These images are recurring too. Sometimes we can find myth-archetypal images of mothers, like symbolic images, and as well as an image of the mother who lost her mind because of the death of her children in the pogrom or other social violence against them. In addition, male writers show the poverty of women, of Jewish women, after the death of their husbands, and only a few depict how a woman is becoming emancipated, independent in this male world afterwards. Likewise, speaking about the Jewish daughters, these images, sometimes they are so to say, the way for their fathers to become richer, or vice versa, because of wealth of their fathers, these Jewish daughters become the head of their families. This wealth of Jewish girls are often associated with the powerful man and connection to the powerful man. And also part of the text is devoted to family relations and the parenting style of the Jewish mothers, who can be quite harsh for the sake of professional future of their children. And I wanted to address some of this text but today they are quite interesting, but it's this shortage of time. So let me move to another motif, which is forced or violent motherhood. Okay. Yeah. And we can see this motif, for instance, in a short story about Marchik, the Jew, a poor tailor, by Stepan Vasilchenko. Stepan Vasilchenko was a writer and well-known peasantry teacher. So he wrote most of his fiction, of course, relying on his teaching experience in the villages and the far regions. In this short story, Vasilchenko describes how a husband disposes the woman's body. The main character, Avrum, a father of a daughter, persistently asks his wife to born a son, though the wife doesn't want a second child in the uncertain time, because it's like 1914 or 1919 when the revolution goes on, and all these riots and the Jewish pogroms and so on. And you may see his telling explanation on the screen, I hope. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it works. Okay. We see Stefan Vasilchenko about Marchik the Jew, a poor tailor quotation.
Okay, super. So I can read out also. But she is a girl, while we need a boy. Avrum argues vigorously. He'll be happy, intelligent, he'll be well educated, and people will elect him as a member of parliament, and he'll be telling people a fiery word of what the freedom is. So it's like, some like a talent. It's a talent reasoning why he wants a boy, not a girl. Unfortunately, in the end of this story, all the family with the kid and a newborn infant died in the pogrom. And by the way, let me mention that Vasilchenko supposedly, according to some minor testimonies and memoirs, wrote this text by request of Ukrainian Ottoman, then Ukrainian head of one of the heads of Ukrainian state, Ukrainian People's Directory and Ukrainian People's Republic, Simon Petlura, in order to reduce anti-Semitic violence in the Ukrainian lands covered by revolution and riots after the October Revolution. So it's like a story. And speaking about the second branch discourse, I want to mention the discourse within this theme of female characters, female representation. It's about the archetype of the beautiful Jewish woman, and men's violence against Jewish women, which mostly means raping or in some cases seduction, both as the cultural metaphors of conquering a woman. And it's particularly so in the short fiction about the war, and especially a fiction about the Jewish pogroms. And I'd like to talk about the talk more about the short story Mother, written by Oleksa Kopelanko, as you may see on the screen, who's the author of several brilliant stories from the Jewish life. And in addition, by the way, this story develops the already mentioned idea of forced maternity, like forced motherhood. According to a plot, a poor Jew, like a poor Jewish woman, Dvosa, lives with her name, lives with her child with disabilities in the poorest and the criminal area of the city. And she has the only friend, buyer Berta, and makes a living with sewing, but again, she lives extremely poorly. And all the time, different men try to have a relationship with her, but simultaneously accuse her body to be filthy, as she gave birth to such a sick child. And again, their attitude confirms the idea of objectification of a woman's female body. But it turned out that during the pogroms, the father of Dvosa gave his 16-year-old daughter to the main rioter, trying to avoid the death. So many years ago, when the pogroms were in the shtetl in the city, Dvosa's father tried to survive by giving his daughter to the mother. And nonetheless, that offender killed the father and many people in shtetl, and of course raped Dvosa. And after that, Dvosa attempted, she became pregnant, and she attempted to kill her unborn child, and then she gave birth to a child which who this boy is described in a terrifying manner, like a monstrous child. So it's in some view it's a kind of a literary plot about Quasimodo and Esmeralda. So in this mother and son pair, and finally, Dvosa was expelled by her community because people believed that her son attracted misfortune. And eventually, in this new life, many years after, her only friend Berta tries to literally sell Dvosa again, like as the new wife to the local criminal, whose wives died in a strong way. And this criminal turned out to be a rapist and the father of Dvosa's son. And Dvosa, in horror, accidentally strangled her son, and then trapped by blackmail and threats from her friend and this criminal, she accepted her terrible fate. And this is extremely hard story to read. It was too difficult for me to read. But much later, I found an interesting story in a book of another acclaimed Ukrainian writer, Mike Johansson, to whom we'll return a bit later, who wrote a book about how to write short fiction. And here he mentioned that initially, Kopolenko, the author of this short story, found out about a mother whose daughter was raped by their lodger, a Russian soldier. And several months later, this man accidentally rented their apartments again. And then the girl got married with him. So Kopolenko impressively transported this real life story into the Jewish picture, the appalling Jewish picture, so to say. Okay, and finally, another big part of short fiction in this context, within this theme, is the theme of the Jewish woman in the relationship with the non-Jew. It's a very popular melodramatic plot of a love affair between a Jewish girl and a Christian man. It was very popular in the early 19th century. And there were even trending plays in theaters of that time. And this plot became consonant with the motif of conversion of a Jewish woman to Christianity, which, of course, is perceived as a grief in her traditional community and as an emancipative step in the secularized society. And here I have three radically different literary examples. I hope I managed to mention it. The first one is the short story by Modest Lewisgame. Lewisgame was a writer, politician, prominent cultural and public figure, and what's more important, a doctor from Volhynia region, originated from the ancient noble family, but treated poor peasantry in order to learn the life. So he was like a rich man who became a doctor for the poor. And he is the author of a series, like a medical series of short fiction, which also relies on his own medical experience. And In his like a kind of a moralizing story Mirage, he writes about the Jewish woman who converted to Christianity because of falling in love with the Polish landlord, and then returned pregnant to her parents for unknown reason. She didn't confess to them about her conversion, like her baptism, because the parents harassed, bullied her, and her community could stone her. And this is like a complicated angle in the traditional Ukrainian view too, as the narrator shows that the woman's sin is not only because of baptism, like a renouncement of the faith, but also in the enslavement, in inverted commas, of the Christian soul of her son. So eventually, the poor Jew, drawn accidentally, and I think because of a kind of epilepsy or so on, and her soul has still been wandering at the night step, while her son's soul is stuck between heaven and earth and will never know peace. So this is like an old-fashioned, old-time interpretation of the Ukrainian and Jewish relations, let's say relations, but it's more about like religious boundaries or so on. And the second story I'd like to mention is The Shameful Case by Queen Polishchuk. Polishchuk it's like another version of a Jewish Ukrainian affair. This, however, it's a socialist, like a kind of socialist view of the theme. So the motive of baptism is just simply replaced by the motive of joining the socialist ranks. So here we have Haika, the only daughter of like the rich Jew, the tenant of the landlord's homes, lands, Barko. Haika is well educated and became interested in popular socialist ideas. And then she escaped on the second attempt from her father and community with socialist, like man, socialist Vakulenko, his surname. They escaped to Berlin. And in order, for what reason they escaped to teach children and to educate far regions. So this is like some socialist interpretation of this classical plot. But actually, I see it here also some like feminist issues in this story. And the third story, I'd like to mention. Okay. It's Stepan Vasilchenko, whom I mentioned previously. It's his short story Outside the Walls, which has a different plot. And you may see a picture of Jewish women from on your screen, because I mentioned this name already. It's a picture of Jewish women from the archives of the Ukrainian Jewish Encounters Initiative. And returning to the story, according to the plot, the Jewish woman, Sonia, got baptized not because of love, but in order to get rid of traditional marriage for the sake intellectual progress, self-development, and education. And this is a controversial topic which combines women's emancipation, female education, the destruction of conservative culture, and destruction of traditional community, and the institution of marriage as well. And Sonia, this woman, Sonia, has an aptitude for science and despises her wealthy but illiterate husband, Duvet. And of course, she doesn't fulfill the appropriate traditional role of wife. So Duvet, her husband, tries to keep his wife by force and forbid her to go to midwifery courses, midwifery school in another city. So Sonia attempted to continue her education and join the non-Jewish environment in this radical way, like by breaking with her family, marriage, and even religion with her community in general. And to sum up, here is like more details, but I will be briefly. To sum up, there is still a lack of female narratives in the short fiction. I mean, female Jewish images, Jewish narratives, particularly there is a lack of representation of Jewish women out of their housekeeping role, like this domestic, out of this domestic settings. As holistic personalities, but at the same time, things are changing. We see it, and the images of like brave, strong-willed women gradually appear, revealing various aspects of women's life, like previously hidden. This revealing discrimination and emancipation. And I hope to move to the move on to the representation of the Jewish pogroms. I see it like one of the central theme in this idea of the Jewish world. Speaking about some historical background, the early 20th century, in particular, the period of the collapse of the Russian Empire, is associated with the Jewish pogroms. The anti-Semitic policy and public sentiment of the Russian Empire, this internal policy, grew into the Black Hundreds pogroms and anti-Semitic events, anti-Semitic insinuations of the 1900s. The Black Hundreds, you may probably know, it's like groups of pro-monarchist orientation and ultra-nationalist orientation groups in the Russian Empire, like movements in the Russian Empire, who were, of course, who had anti-Semitic stance. So, and they were activizing these Jewish pogroms in the Russian Empire, even after the collapse of the Russian Empire. And later, the violence also continued when we are talking about the period after the October Revolution in the Russian Empire. For example, I have some statistic data between 1917 and 1921. More than 1,000 pogroms were recorded in the Nadnepryatshchina region of Ukraine. It's like central part of Ukraine, and including some northern region including Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine. So in short fiction, the Jewish pogroms are depicted in diverse ways. On macro and micro scales, through the tragedy of individual family and through the tragedy of like an entire town or shtetl, via descriptions of the mutilated human body, this, as I mentioned, some diseases, some symptoms, through the psychology and emotions, battle pictures, military revolutionary pathos, and as well as long-term consequences in the post-revolutionary period. And specifically, anti-Jewish violence is depicted using expressionist metaphors, more frequently images of fire, blood, violence, death, and hate speech. I see that we are running out of time, so Tadeusz, can I conclude? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I didn't say about the Jewish agricultural colonies. It's also an interesting part of Ukrainian literature, because on the south of Ukraine and the southern regions, there were a campaign of establishment of the Jewish agricultural colonies with support of American organizations, especially AgroJoint, and some Ukrainian writers described this like specific world and this way of the Jewish population becoming similar in some way to Ukrainians, to Ukrainian peasantry, and this is also highly interested like theme discourse. So it should be mentioned. And also to conclude with this topic, with this like lecture, with this talk, in general, I'd like to say that this is just a small part of the Jewish world in the Ukrainian short fiction. So I hope this talk was interesting, helpful for you, and that's it for now. And thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to answer your questions right now, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any additional questions or comments, especially you might be interested in more detailed analysis, so I can share like relevant information with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk, Khrystyna. And actually, we have a few questions, but I will allow myself to ask the first one, because as I understand, as you said, this is only a part of your broader research. Mm-hmm. So in how many novels within this time frame Jewish subjects or topic exist, more or less? And whenever it was rather marginal or popular to use Jewish topics in Ukrainian novels?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tadeusz. I've already analyzed 120 short stories, but yesterday, while preparing to this lecture and rereading like some of the texts, I found another one extremely interesting text. So this theme in Ukrainian short fiction is wide, extensive, and answering your like the second part of your question, I'd like to say that it's not a marginal theme. It's more about popular texts. Of course, we have not so, like minor texts, minor short stories of the second row, this third row, in terms of like the canon, yes, and this comparison of the text. But actually, the Jewish theme has become quite popular in the 20th century short fiction, and of course, it's been developing since then to the modern and contemporary Ukrainian literature.
Okay, thank you very much. There is a question by Sharon. What about the modern, meaning current Ukrainian literature in terms of Jewish topics? Is it something that modern, nowadays Ukrainian literature is using?
Can you please specify or just repeat, because I didn't catch?
I think the question is about current Ukrainian literature. Whenever writers of today, they are using Jewish topics as well.
Mm-hmm. My research is focused, most of my research, because I have various research interests, and mostly they are focused on the first half of the 20th century. So, but actually, yes, Jewish theme is I'd say highly popular in the contemporary modern day Ukrainian literature, especially in the context of the Holocaust remembrance and the reconsideration of the Holocaust, and like returning of the memory of these contested memories in general, and the memories of the communities which were like forgotten. So the Jewish, the memory of the Jewish and the Jewish history is quite popular amongst today's writers, and yes, my answer is yes.
Okay, lovely. Okay, and we have a question a bit different from Benjamin. If you could say a bit about the Ukrainian language and the development, when the first books are written in Ukrainian language or the publications, could you specify something about the development of the written Ukrainian language and the books which were published within in this language?
I'd better, because I can't recall exact terms, so I'd better want to answer this question because it's not a part of today's talk. So
of course.
Yeah, it's some things slipped my mind, so it's better. Yeah, it's better to.
Yeah, somebody can also check in the internet, I guess. It wasn't exactly about the lecture.
Yeah, so I'm interested in what, when you speak about Ukrainian literature, was Ukrainian literature all written in Ukrainian, or was it also some of it written in Russian too?
Thank you for your question. It's extremely interesting question. I considered the text written only in Ukrainian only, because like my specialization was Ukrainian literature. But regarding your question in general, I have the only answer how to identify Ukrainian literature and the literature in Ukrainian literatures written in different languages. But yes, I consider it as a part of as part of Ukrainian culture and as an important part of Ukrainian culture. So because we are talking about Ukrainian lands as borderlands, as there is some even some definition of like a melting pot of different cultures. So from this perspective, from this standpoint, Ukrainian literature had been enriching with these different languages, like literatures written in different languages, and we have to consider it within this cultural process. But actually, I regarded these texts as Ukrainian because one of my points was that they are written in Ukrainian language.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for this question as well. Thank you very much, Khrystyna, again. Thank you, all of you who attended, and have a good evening or good afternoon if you are in another time zone.
Thank you so much, Tadeusz, and again, thank you all for joining this lecture.
Thank you very much.